In a courtroom where justice feels like a distant dream, Selena Ward stands up not just as a sister of a wrongfully accused brother, but as a federal agent ready to expose the truth. Watch the shocking moment that flips the courtroom upside down and forces the system to face its demons. Morning sunlight streamed through the towering glass windows of the Riverside Justice Center, casting long beams across the polished marble floor. It was crisp and cold outside, but inside Courtroom 3, the air felt thick, tight like a violin string on the verge of snapping. Every whisper, every darting glance was fixed on the black woman standing beside the defense table. Selena Ward, 38. Selena wore a charcoal gray suit tailored to fit her frame, the collar fastened neatly like a kind of mental armor. Her natural black curls were pulled into a tidy bun at the nape of her neck. Every step she took was precise, measured. She didn't hold her head high with arrogance, nor did she bow in submission. She stood upright, calm, composed, with eyes that held the sharpness of a concealed blade. Next to her sat her older brother, Damian Ward, 40, silent and unmoving. His large hands were clasped tightly together, knuckles white from tension. Once a technical operations manager at a local auto plant, he had been a symbol of stability until a routine traffic stop in the middle of the street turned into a violent arrest. That day, security cameras had clearly recorded a police officer shoving Damian face first onto the pavement, his only offense, asking why he was being stopped. Yet somehow, today, he sat in court labeled a resisting arrest suspect. The courtroom doors opened. Judge Thomas Beckett entered, a white man in his late 60s, his thinning silver hair slicked back meticulously, as though outward order could mask the fractures underneath. He wore his black judicial robe, like a shield of power long divorced from principle. His eyes scanned the courtroom, and when they landed on Selena, the disdain was thinly veiled. The case of Damian Ward. The court clerk announced. "Let me guess," Judge Beckett muttered, loud enough for the front row to hear. "You're here to cry and tell a story, aren't you?" A dry chuckle escaped his lips. The room turned to ice. Selena said nothing. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, silent, as if her very silence was a kind of defiance. From the prosecution table, Aaron Greaves, a well-dressed white man with slick-back confidence, glanced at her and smirked. Selena felt the weight of the room on her shoulders. She could read the eyes around her, some curious, some pitying, but most filled with skepticism. A black woman in court, testifying for her brother, and composed. They knew nothing. She hadn't come to beg for sympathy. She had come to bring the truth into the light. And what they could never suspect, what none of them could see yet, was that she wasn't just Damian's sister. She was a federal agent. She just hadn't told them that. Yet, Selena had barely taken her seat beside Damian when Judge Thomas Beckett began doing what he was notoriously respected for in Havenbrook. The icy arrogance of a man who truly believed he was a law. "Defense counsel," Beckett said, voice sharp as a blade, eyes narrowing toward Jordan Kim, the young defense attorney fumbling nervously through his files. "I hope you brought something more useful than the nonsense I've already seen in the case file." Jordan stood shakily, gripping a folder with trembling hands. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit into evidence a copy of the surveillance footage from the day of the incident. It clearly shows my client, Mr. Damian Ward, being shoved to the ground without offering any resistance." Beckett waved a hand dismissively, like he was swatting away a fly. "That video," he said with languid disdain, "has been reviewed. And as I've said before, we're not here to judge a video. We're here to judge the defendant's attitude toward law enforcement." Selena clenched her fists in her lap. She had watched that footage no fewer than 20 times. Frame by frame, it showed the officer approaching Damian with aggressive posture, then violently shoving him to the cold concrete. All because he had dared to ask why he was being stopped. And now, this very courtroom, the very seat of justice, was doing what it had always done so well, twisting truth into attitude. The jury sat still, their eyes flickering. Some looked uncertain. Others already seemed drawn into the one-man play Judge Beckett was directing from the bench. "We don't have time," Beckett said, now glancing at Selena as she leaned slightly forward in her chair, clearly preparing to speak. for unsolicited insight from people on the sidelines. His gaze sharpened. "Ms. Ward, I understand you are the defendant's sister. I imagine that makes you emotionally invested, but emotions have no place in this courtroom." Selena looked up at him. Her voice did not waver. "I didn't come to speak about emotion, Your Honor," she replied, tone even and clear. "I came to speak about the truth." Beckett scoffed. "The truth?" he echoed, lips curling. "Perhaps you should leave that to people with the proper training." The room went quiet. The words weren't explicit, but their meaning hung heavy in the air. A black woman couldn't possibly understand the law, couldn't possibly grasp justice, and certainly had no place speaking in this room. Damien lowered his head. Selena could feel the beat of his heart, faster than usual. She gently placed a hand on his forearm. "I'm fine," she whispered. "We haven't even started yet." Judge Beckett tapped his gavel lightly. "We'll proceed to cross-examination. And let me be clear. If there are any further interruptions in the defense table or extraneous witnesses, I will clear this courtroom." Selena stared directly at Judge Beckett, unblinking. He could control the courtroom, but he couldn't control the truth. And the truth, soon enough, would start shaking the very seat of power he sat on. Selena Ward sat quietly at the defense table, her hand still resting lightly on Damien's arm, a quiet anchor in the rising storm. Judge Beckett's thinly veiled remarks still hung in the air, but she didn't respond. No rebuttal, no retreat. She had been in rooms far more dangerous than this one, on political battlegrounds, inside the treacherous corridors of Washington, D.C., and deep within covert operations where even her identity was classified. But never, not once, had her blood boiled like this, simply from watching a man entrusted with power use it to crush justice underfoot. She didn't look at Beckett like an adversary. She looked at him like the embodiment of a system that had grown too comfortable with never being questioned, a system that sat smugly on the edge of morality, thinking that whoever spoke the loudest would always win. But Selena hadn't come to speak loud. She had come to speak precisely. "Court will recess for 10 minutes, Beckett declared, standing up and walking out with slow, deliberate stride, the kind of walk worn by a man convinced his script was still unfolding exactly as planned. Selena rose to her feet. The click of her low heels on the marble floor echoed like the ticking of a clock counting down. Damien looked up at her, voice low. "I'm sorry for dragging you into this." She turned, placing a gentle hand on his chest. "You didn't drag me anywhere. I'm here because I choose what's right." "But Beckett..." Damien hesitated. "He's not listening to anyone. You saw that." "That's exactly," Selena said, her smile faint but firm, "why he's easy to surprise." She walked out of the courtroom. No phone calls. No whispering to colleagues. She didn't need drama. She needed timing. And the right moment. In the hallway outside, the air felt slightly lighter. Selena leaned back against the cool stone wall, eyes closed for exactly 3 seconds, a habit drilled into her during agent training. Regulate your heartbeat before making a move. She wasn't a woman begging for mercy. She wasn't just a sister defending her brother. She was Selena Ward, federal security agent, a woman who had investigated national threats, stared down suspects who reached for guns before she could reach for her badge. What she was about to do didn't fall under courtroom procedure, but it did fall under the law of truth. When the chimes signaled the end of recess, Selena turned and walked back into the courtroom. Her stance hadn't changed, calm, composed, and waiting. Beckett could laugh in her face. The prosecutor could treat her like an outsider. But there was only one person in that courtroom counting every step, weighing every word. And that person was Selena, because when you hold the truth, you don't have to chase attention. It finds you. And very soon, every eye in this room would have no choice but to follow her. The air in Riverside courtroom after recess felt heavier, as if everyone sensed something coming, something larger than a case, larger than the court's authority. Judge Thomas Beckett re-entered, his black robe trailing behind him like a spill of ink. His eyes flicked immediately toward Selena Ward, still there, still composed, still unsettling him in a way he couldn't explain. "Court is back in session," Beckett announced. then looked down toward the defense table. "Ms. Ward," he said, dragging her name like a warning, "I try to be polite, to give you a moment of sisterly sentiment. But it's becoming clear you fancy yourself some sort of law enforcement expert." He paused, flashing a derisive grin. "So enlighten me, would you? Did you do a ride-along with Havenbrook PD? Or maybe picked up a few things from YouTube videos?" A few stifled chuckles rippled across the room. Aaron Greaves, the prosecutor, smirked behind his table like he was enjoying a free comedy show. Selena didn't smile. She stood slowly. The sound of her low heels tapping the marble floor came like the beat of war drums. "Your Honor," she said, voice low and even, "I understand you think I'm just an overly emotional sister, but if you allow me, I'll give you a reason to stop laughing." Beckett folded his arms, clearly amused. "Oh, I'm listening, expert." Selena said nothing more. She reached into the inside lining of her gray blazer and pulled out a small black leather wallet. Not the kind that held money, but the kind only a select few are ever issued. She flipped it open and turned it toward the judge and jury. Under the sterile glow of courtroom LEDs, the gold embossed badge of the Federal Protective Bureau, an elite agency second only to the FBI in protecting high-level officials and conducting internal federal investigations, gleamed like a punch straight to Beckett's ego. Selena Ward, Senior Agent, Badge ID 08-745, Federal Protective Bureau. I've led investigations into police misconduct across 3 states, and I'm currently on leave to be here today, as a witness, a citizen, and a sister. The courtroom erupted in stunned whispers, jaws dropping in disbelief. Jordan Kim, the defense attorney, dropped his pen onto the table. Aaron Greaves, the prosecutor, turned pale and stiffened in his seat. And Judge Beckett, he stood frozen, his eyes locked on the badge still resting in Selena's hand. Living proof of the truth he had just mocked. "I don't need you to validate my credentials, Your Honor," Selena said, her voice smooth and hard as steel. "I carry this badge every day while hunting those who bend the law for their own power. I just didn't expect I'd need to show it in a courtroom." From the back row, a local reporter, previously unnoticed, recorded discreetly beneath the bench. Selena saw it, but this time she didn't stop him, because this moment needed to spread. The courtroom was dead silent. Everyone held their breath. Selena closed the badge and tucked it back into her pocket. Then she walked calmly back to the defense table. Before sitting down, she cast one final glance at Beckett. Her eyes held no anger, only the cool certainty of someone who had always known this moment was coming. Beckett said nothing, because for the first time during this trial, he had nothing to say. No one in the room spoke for a full minute after Selena returned to her seat. No one moved. No one even exhaled too loudly. Even Judge Thomas Beckett, a man who prided himself on silencing courtrooms with a single glare, sat there as the only person too afraid to look up. Selena rose again. No permission asked. No bow. No hesitation. "Your Honor, and members of the jury," she began, her eyes locked onto the 12 stunned faces across the room. "I know you didn't expect a federal agent to walk into this courtroom. You didn't expect a sister or a black woman to speak like this." She paused, not for effect, but for weight. "But if you think today is about a resisting arrest charge, let me be clear. This is a test of conscience. A test of whether justice is truly blind, or just pretending not to see what it doesn't want to confront." Aaron Greaves began to rise, clearly ready to object, but the sharp look in Selena's eyes stopped him cold. He sat back down, quietly, avoiding her gaze. "I've worked with some of the highest-ranking national security officials in this country," Selena continued. "I've intercepted people who could have collapsed governments with a single phone call. But nothing chills me more than walking into this room and realizing that manipulation doesn't need weapons. It just needs a robe and a gavel." A quiet wow slipped out from the back row, quickly silenced by a sharp look from courthouse security. But the truth couldn't be restrained. "Judge Beckett," Selena said, turning fully toward the bench the first time, "you don't have to like me. You don't even have to believe me. But you don't get to bend the truth to fit the seat you're sitting in." Beckett flushed red, but said nothing, because he knew Any reaction now would only unmask him further. Selena turned back to the jury. You've seen the evidence. You've seen the video. And you've seen how justice can be twisted. How my brother, Damian Ward, was labeled a threat simply because he dared to ask, why was I pulled over? She stepped forward. Today is not just about Damian, Selena said, her voice unwavering. Today is about the people no one ever stands up for. The people whose words get traded for smirks, right here in the very place that's supposed to protect them. She looked at each juror one by one. No one looked away. If you truly believe in the law, she continued, then today prove it, not with sentiment, with truth. She turned and walked back to the defense table, her eyes briefly meeting Damian's. He sat frozen, his eyes glassy but his head held high. Selena took her seat. She exhaled, one deep, steady breath. The courtroom no longer belonged to Beckett. It had become a stage for the truth, and she was the one who had lit the spotlight. No one moved. No one spoke. Selena Ward's words still lingered in the air like the aftershock of a silent explosion. Judge Thomas Beckett sat motionless on the bench, gripping the edge of his desk until his knuckles turned white. His face remained stern, but the arrogance had slipped away. In its place was unease. Selena didn't need to look at him to know it. She'd seen that look before, on the faces of powerful men who had just realized they'd misjudged the woman sitting across from them. The defense, Beckett said, his voice lower, raspier than before, if there's video evidence, present it now. The court will review it. A reluctant concession. But for a man like Beckett, it was already a notable retreat. Jordan Kim gave a swift nod, hands trembling slightly as he plugged the USB into the projector. The large screen on the right side of the courtroom flickered to life, then settled on the static image from a nearby traffic camera. Every gaze locked onto the screen. First, a grainy image of a silver sedan pulled over on the side of the road. Damian stepped out, hands raised clearly and calmly. No sudden movement. His voice wasn't audible, but his gestures were unmistakably non-threatening. Then came the officer, Officer Kellen Ross, as named in the case file. He approached quickly, barely speaking, pointing sharply at Damian, and without warning, shoved him hard. Damian fell backwards onto the curb, his head striking concrete edge. A ripple ran through the room. Jesus Christ, someone whispered. A woman near the door, hand to her mouth. The footage continued. Damian, visibly dazed, raised his hands again, as if asking for an explanation, still showing no signs of resistance. But Officer Ross drew his handcuffs, dropped a knee into Damian's back, and pinned him to the ground like he was taking down a violent fugitive. Selena didn't flinch. Her eyes remained fixed on the screen. She didn't need to see it again. She knew every frame by heart. But now, she needed everyone else in that room to watch it, to really see it. Once, that was all it took. No room for denial. No space for spin. No excuse left to cling to. The video stopped, and a deadly silence fell over the courtroom. Even Aaron Greaves, the once confident prosecutor, now sat with his head bowed, gripping his pen so tightly it looked as though it might snap in two. Selena stood. This time, there was no need for speeches, no raised voice. Just one line, soft as breath, sharp as a scalpel. "Your Honor," she said, "is this a defiant attitude you were referring to?" Judge Beckett didn't respond. He blinked over and over, like a man hoping for an invisible hand to lift him out of the wreckage. Wreckage of a courtroom he could no longer control. A silver-haired woman on the jury placed a trembling hand over her chest, trying to steady her heartbeat. A middle-aged man beside her took a deep breath, his eyes red-rimmed. What they had seen wasn't just a video. It was a mirror, a raw, undeniable reflection of an injustice they'd always believed happened elsewhere, to other people. Selena turned and sat back down beside Damian. He said nothing, but his eyes, after weeks of fatigue and doubt, held light again, the light of a man about to be seen, not as a case file, not as a statistic, but as a human being, entitled to the same protection under the law as anyone else. When the footage ended, no one dared call this a simple case anymore. Jordan Kim, The defense attorney, who had spent the entire trial in a long shadow of a broken system, and his own paralyzing self-doubt, rose to his feet. His hand still shook slightly, but his eyes had changed. They no longer belonged to a man trying to keep up. They belonged to someone who now understood why he was standing there at all. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Jordan began, his voice tentative at first, but gaining strength with every word. "I'm not a polished speaker. I don't have 20 years of courtroom experience like the prosecution, but I have the only two things a defense attorney truly needs: the truth and the courage to speak it." Selena tilted her head slightly toward him, a quiet smile forming on her lips. She didn't need to say anything. Her eyes said it for her. "Now you understand." Jordan stepped closer to the jury. No notes, no papers, nothing in his hands but conviction. "What you just witnessed was what my client endured. A routine interaction, spiraling into violence, humiliation, and then fabrication." He paused, let the silence underline his next point. And when he stood up for himself, he wasn't just fighting an officer. He was fighting a system, one that had already decided he was wrong, simply because of who he was. And then, something no one expected happened. From the gallery, a young man suddenly stood up, holding his phone high, his hand trembling with emotion. "I was arrested by Ross last year too," he shouted. "It was just as wrong. I have the video. I kept it because I was scared. But now, I can't stay silent anymore." A shockwave tore through the courtroom. Judge Beckett raised his hand to call security, but Jordan turned swiftly. "Your Honor, if this is a new witness, we move to pause proceedings and enter his evidence into the record." "Sit down," Beckett barked. "No." Selena rose to her feet, her voice sharp as a blade. "You don't get to silence the truth just because it arrived late. Justice doesn't wear a watch, Your Honor." The courtroom exploded in murmurs and gasps. The young man was escorted out by court officers for formal questioning. But the impact of that moment was irreversible. Jordan turned to the jury again, now with fire in his voice. "When justice is silenced," he said, "it finds another way to speak. Through a video, through a voice, through a sister like Selena Ward." He motioned toward Damien, now sitting taller than ever, shoulders square, eyes unwavering. Damien didn't resist an officer. He resisted injustice. "And today, I ask you to help him do it the right way. Lawfully, responsibly." Jordan stepped back, took a deep breath. The courtroom was silent. Not a whisper, not a cough. Jordan Kim was no longer the inexperienced, hesitant attorney who had stumbled through opening arguments. He had become the voice of justice. And for the first time since the trial began, Selena Ward was not the only one lighting fires in that room. The Riverside Justice Center no longer felt the same. The air had changed, not just because of Selena's truths or Jordan's powerful closing, but because everyone could now feel it. The truth had broken through the doors that power once kept sealed. Judge Thomas Beckett sat motionless on the bench. The gavel in his hand no longer felt like an instrument of control. It now waited to strike for justice, not ego. He glanced at the jury, 12 faces that had witnessed every turn of this trial, from the early condescension to the undeniable video, to the unexpected voice that rose from the gallery. Judge Beckett cleared his throat, struggling to summon the authority that had gradually slipped from his grasp. "The jury has reached a verdict," he announced, voice steadying, though his hand trembled slightly as he held the folder. The foreperson, a woman in her late 50s, with eyes both soft and serious, stood. She held a folded white sheet in both hands. She took a deep breath, her eyes sweeping over Damien, then pausing on Selena. "We have carefully considered the evidence, witness testimony, and all applicable points of law," she said. "And based on that review, the entire courtroom held its breath. We find defendant Damien Ward not guilty." The sound that followed wasn't applause. It was relief. A long, shaky exhale echoed from Damien's elderly mother, seated in the last row, her hands trembling in her lap. A man in a navy suit near the wall whispered, finally, like he'd been released from something himself. And Selena? She didn't cry. She simply turned to Damien, her brother, who had endured more than his share of lies, and took his hand. "You're free," she whispered. "And this time, no one's taking that from you." Damien nodded, eyes rimmed red but filled with light. Judge Beckett brought the gavel down. "This court is adjourned," he said. But the words no longer held the weight they once did. Even he could hear the hollow ring in them. He stood, gathering his papers with stiff, awkward hands. Some in the room avoided his gaze. Some didn't, especially Selena, the woman who had forced him to face the one thing he had spent a career avoiding, the truth. As he stepped down from the bench, the black robe that had once symbolized dominance now hung heavy, no longer a mark of power, but the remnant of an era on the edge of collapse. Across the courtroom, journalists began rising from their seats. Cameras clicked on. Lights blinked to life. This time, Selena didn't step aside. She stood beside Damien, shoulder to shoulder, her hand still wrapped around his. "Ms. Ward, just one question." A young reporter called out above the noise. "What do you think made the real difference in this case?" Selena smiled, not the smile of victory, but the kind of smile that knew at last justice was no longer a distant idea. It had arrived. "It wasn't the badge," she said. "It wasn't the video. Not even the closing argument." She looked straight into the camera lens. "It was the fact that we didn't stay silent." 2 weeks after the trial at Riverside Justice Center, Selena Ward's name had spread across evening news broadcasts and legal reform forums alike. But unlike many who fade behind the spotlight, she began to step forward, deliberately, into the spaces where change needed to be planted. At Havenbrook University, inside the Fairlight Auditorium, Selena stood before a crowd of law students, former inmates, journalists, and criminal justice reform advocates. Stage lights cast a quiet glow across her face, highlighting the resolute gaze of a woman who both fought and survived to tell the story. "Justice doesn't arrive on its own," she said, her voice clear and even. "It only shows up when someone has the courage to name the truth and keep naming it, even when no one listens." She didn't read from a script. Every word came straight from the trial, lived, not written. From the smirks of doubt to the moment truth tilted an entire system. "Justice is a journey," she continued. "And every single one of you sitting here, whether you're a student, someone who's been wrongfully convicted, or a future lawyer, you're holding the wheel." At that same moment, Damien Ward stood in a very different kind of space. Not an auditorium. No microphones. No camera crews. He was speaking to a group of high school students at the newly opened Ward Legacy Youth Center, a community initiative supported by local organizations. Shirt sleeves rolled up, his smile open and warm, Damien shared his story, not with bitterness, but with the kind of raw honesty that didn't need to prove anything. "That day," he said, "I thought I'd be convicted because of my skin color, because of an officer's glare, because of a system that stayed quiet." One student raised a hand. "What made you not give up?" Damien looked out the window. The afternoon sun spilled across hand-painted posters hanging around the room. He turned back and answered, "Because my sister didn't give up, and because justice is not some far-off idea. It's what you choose to do when you see something wrong." That evening, as Selena and Damien sat together on the porch, sipping hot tea, they didn't say much. They didn't need to say anything. The victory had come, but they both knew it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a promise that from now on, they would never let silence take the place of truth again. At the statewide Justice Reform Conference, held inside Havenbrook Civic Hall, the spotlight illuminated the stage where Selena Ward stepped up to the podium. Hundreds sat in the audience, attorneys, lawmakers, activists, students, and people once discarded by the system. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Selena didn't glance at her notes. She looked straight ahead, and when she spoke, her voice rang out like a bell in the midnight quiet. "Someone once asked me," she began, "does justice really exist, or is it just a dream written into the Constitution?" She paused. The entire hall went still. "I've seen justice," she said, "not in a courtroom verdict, but in the resilience of people who refuse to bow to injustice. I saw it in my brother's eyes as he walked out of that courtroom, not as a criminal, but as a man whose dignity had finally been recognized." Her gaze swept across the audience. Justice isn't something you're handed. It doesn't ascend from a bench or flow from a black robe. It's built, fought for, and protected every single day by those willing to stand up, to say no, and to risk something in order to keep the truth alive. Applause began to rise, soft at first, then swelling into a thunderous ovation that filled the hall. Selena calmly unclipped the microphone from her collar. She stepped down from the podium, her eyes never leaving the front row, where Damian Ward sat, hands folded on his knees, his expression glowing with quiet pride. She didn't walk like a keynote speaker who had just finished a powerful address. She walked like a warrior who had just laid her sword down, only to prepare to lift it again. Because justice doesn't end with one victorious verdict. It begins the moment we stop staying silent.